They say rejection breaks you. They say it hollows you out from the inside, leaves you empty, leaves you reaching for something that is no longer there. They say the cruelest thing one person can do to another is look them in the eyes. After years of sacrifice, after years of showing up, after years of choosing them over and over again, and say, "You are not enough." And maybe that is true for most people. Maybe for most people that moment would be the ending. But for me, it was only the beginning. My name is Sarah, and the night Darien Voss stood before the entire pack, before the elders, the warriors, the woman he had already chosen to replace me, and looked me dead in my eyes and said those words, I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not fall apart the way he expected me to. I turned around, walked through those heavy iron gates, and stepped out into a storm that felt like it had been waiting for me. And standing in the rain, still as stone, watching me like he already knew exactly who I was and why I was there, was a man I had never seen before in my life. Tall, dark, dangerous in a way you do not understand right away, you just feel it, like a pressure behind your ribs, like the air around him carried a different kind of weight. And before I could think, before I could stop myself, something came out of my mouth that I had never said to anyone. Something I did not even know I was capable of saying. I looked at a stranger in the rain, and I said, "Marry me, tonight." He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said yes. No questions, no conditions. No hesitation. Just yes. What I did not know in that moment, what I could not have possibly understood as the rain soaked through my clothes and the gates of my old life closed behind me, was that the man standing in front of me was not just any man. He was a king, the kind of king that other alphas whispered about in low voices and never looked directly at, the kind of king that entire packs moved out of the way for. And he had already known my name, long before I ever spoke a word to him. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. But let us slow down for just a moment, because before we go any further into that night, before we follow Sarah out of those gates and into a life she never saw coming, there are things you need to understand. There are questions that are going to follow you through this entire story. How does a woman walk away from the only life she has ever known, the only love she has ever allowed herself to feel, and not shatter completely? What kind of man agrees to marry a woman he has never spoken to, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm, without asking a single question? And why did he already know her name? Because here is what you need to hold on to as this story unfolds. Nothing that happened that night was random. Not the timing, not the storm, not the meeting, not the marriage. Every single piece of it had been arranged by something far older and far larger than either of them could see. What felt like desperation was actually destiny answering. What felt like the worst night of Sarah's life was the night her real life finally began. But to understand where she ended up, you have to understand where she came from. You have to understand who she was before the gates closed behind her. You have to understand Ironvale. Ironvale was not a cruel place exactly. It was just a place with rules. Old rules. Rules that had been carved into the foundation of the pack so long ago that most people had stopped questioning them entirely. They had simply become the way things were. And the most important rule in Ironvale, the one that touched every decision, every alliance, every mating bond, was bloodline. Pure blood mattered above everything else. If your lineage was clean, if you could trace your wolf blood back through generations without interruption, then doors opened for you in Ironvale. You were given rank without having to earn it. You were given respect without having to fight for it. You were seen. And if your bloodline was mixed, if somewhere in your ancestry there had been a human or a bond that broke the purity of the line, then you were not seen, not hated, not cast out, just invisible. Sarah had been invisible since the day she was born. Her mother had loved a man who was not pure, and that decision, that quiet, private act of love, had followed Sarah every single day of her life in Iron Vale. She wore it like a mark no one spoke of out loud, but everyone acknowledged in the way they looked at her. Or rather, the way they did not. She was not bitter about it. Not at first. Because Sarah was not the kind of person who sat with what was unfair and let it rot inside her. She was the kind of person who got up before the sun. She was the kind of person who trained in the mud when everyone else was still sleeping. Who stayed in the sparring circle until her arms were shaking and her knuckles were split. Who studied strategy late into the night by firelight, old battle maps, pack histories, the tactical decisions that had shaped Iron Vale's wars for 3 generations. She made herself useful. She made herself necessary. She trained warriors who later rose in rank and never mentioned her name when they did. She drafted formations that her alpha implemented and took full credit for. She solved problems that others were given medals for solving. And she did all of it quietly, not because she was afraid to speak, but because she believed, truly believed, deep down in the place where hope lives before it learns better, that if she was patient enough, if she was loyal enough, if she proved herself through action rather than words, then she would be seen. Then it would matter. Then the man she loved would finally look at her the way she had always looked at him. Darien Voss. He was the Alpha's eldest son, heir to Iron Vale, raised from birth to lead, and he was everything the pack admired, strong, composed, decisive. He had a presence that filled a room before he entered it. He spoke and people listened. He moved and people got out of the way. Sarah had fallen in love with him slowly, the way you fall into deep water when you do not realize how far from shore you have drifted. And by the time you notice, going back is no longer an option. She had not planned it, had not wanted it even, because she knew, in the honest part of herself, that loving Darien Voss was a complicated thing. He saw her worth. She was certain of that. In quiet moments, when the pack was not watching, when it was just the 2 of them and a problem that needed solving, he saw her clearly. He listened to her. He valued her mind. He told her, more than once, that she was unlike anyone he had ever known, and she had held on to those moments. She had built her entire hope around those moments, because she believed that a man who truly saw you would eventually choose you. She believed that time and loyalty and love would be enough. She was wrong, and the night she found out just how wrong she had been was the night everything changed. The summons came at midday. That was the first sign that something was wrong. Not the message itself, but the hour. The way it was delivered. Publicly, in the center of the pack grounds, where anyone standing nearby could hear. In Iron Vale, when an Alpha's family dealt with private matters, they did so privately. Behind closed doors. With discretion. A public summons meant this was not meant to be private. This was meant to be witnessed. Sarah did not know that yet as she made her way across the grounds. She told herself she was reading too much into it. Told herself that the way the other pack members were glancing at her, not quite meeting her eyes, was nothing. Just a strange afternoon. Just nerves. But somewhere deeper, in that quiet place where the body knows things before the mind catches up, she already knew. The great hall was full by the time she arrived. Every elder. Every senior warrior. The ranked members of the pack lined up along the walls like they were waiting for something formal. Something significant. And at the center of it all, calm, composed, already decided, stood Darien. He looked exactly the same as he always did. That was the thing that hit her first. She had somehow imagined that a moment this significant would show on his face. That he would look uncertain or pained or at least human about it. He did not. And then she saw the woman standing 3 steps behind him. Elegant. Poised. Her posture carrying the effortless ease of someone who had been raised knowing they belonged everywhere they stood. Pure blood. Obviously. Without question. Sarah looked at her for exactly 2 seconds before she made herself look away. She would not give anyone in that room the satisfaction of watching her understand before she had to. Darien spoke. His voice was the same voice she had heard 1,000 times. Measured, clear, carrying the authority of someone who had never had to raise it to be heard. He said 6 words. 6 words for 6 years. You are not enough for my bloodline. The room did not make a sound. Not a breath. Not a shuffle. Not a single shift of weight. Everyone was waiting. Waiting to see what she would do. Waiting for the breakdown. For the tears. For the begging that would make the moment complete. That would give the gathered witnesses something to talk about for months. Something that would confirm that she had always been too small for this world anyway. Sarah stood still. She felt the words land. She felt what they meant. She felt the years she had given, the mornings she had bled, the nights she had waited. She felt all of it come up against those 6 words and just stop. And then something happened inside her that she had not expected. She did not shatter. She hardened. Not into anger exactly, though anger was there, yes, underneath everything like a slow-burning coal. It was something older than anger. Something quieter and more final. It was the feeling of a door closing. Not slamming. Not being ripped away. Just closing. Gently. Like the last page of a book you had been reading for years. Finally turned. She looked at Darien for one long moment. She wanted to see if there was anything there. Any trace of the man who had once told her she was unlike anyone he had ever known. Any flicker of something human behind the composed alpha mask. There was nothing. And that, more than the rejection itself, more than the audience, more than the woman standing behind him, that was what made her understand. He had not chosen his bloodline over her tonight. He had made that choice a long time ago. Tonight was just the announcement. She had been staying in a story that had already ended without her knowing. Loving a man who had already mentally moved on, already made his calculations, already selected his future while she was still showing up and proving herself and waiting. She had not been his love. She had been his placeholder. And in that moment, standing in the center of that silent hall, with every eye on her face, Sarah Elaine stopped waiting. She did not say anything. There was nothing worth saying to a room full of people who had already made up their minds. She turned around, and she walked out, through the hall, through the corridor, through the heavy iron gates that had marked the boundary of her entire world for 24 years. And the storm hit her the second she crossed the threshold. Cold, immediate, violent, like the sky had been holding its breath and could finally let go. If the story has your heart in your chest right now, comment below and tell me you are still here. I want to know who is watching all the way through. And if someone sent this to you, they knew exactly what they were doing. Welcome. The storm did not care about her. That was actually the first relief she had felt in hours, maybe longer. The rain came down hard and indifferent, soaking through her clothes within seconds, plastering her hair to her face, turning the path under her feet into something uncertain and dark. It did not care who her parents were. It did not care about her bloodline. It did not rank her or measure her or find her insufficient. It just rained. She walked without a direction. She had not thought that far ahead. She had only known that she could not stay inside those walls another minute and breathe the same air as the people who had just watched her be discarded. She did not know how long she had been walking when she felt it. A stillness. Not silence, the storm was too loud for silence. But a kind of stillness within the noise. Presence. The way the air changes in a room when someone walks in who carries real weight. She looked up. He was standing at the edge of the path, maybe 20 feet ahead of her. Just standing there. In the rain. Unmoving. He was tall. Taller than most men she had known, and she had known warriors. He was dressed dark, and the rain did not seem to bother him the way it bothered everything else around him. He was simply there, as though he had been standing in that exact spot for a very long time and had no intention of moving. He was watching her. Not the way strangers watch you when you have clearly been crying and your clothes are ruined and you are walking in the middle of a storm with no destination. Not with pity. Not with the awkward uncertainty of someone wondering whether to offer help. He was watching her with certainty, like she was arriving somewhere she was supposed to be. Every sensible thing in her told her to change direction, to walk around him, to be practical about the fact that she was a woman alone in a storm and there was a man she did not recognize standing in the dark, watching her with eyes that held too much knowledge. She had always been practical. She had always been careful. But she was standing on the other side of a gate that had just closed behind her, and she was soaking wet, and 6 years of her life had just been summed up in 6 words, and she was done. Done being careful. Done being practical. Done waiting for life to become something worth living. She stopped walking. She looked at him, and she said, out loud, to a complete stranger, in the middle of a storm, at the worst moment of her entire life, "Marry me, tonight." The words surprised her as much as they left her. She had not planned them, had not thought them through. They had come from somewhere below thought, below strategy, below every careful thing she had ever done. Silence. The rain kept falling. He looked at her for a long moment, that same steady, certain look, and she braced herself for the expression she expected. The confusion, the polite backing away. He said, yes. One word.
No hesitation.
No question.
No laughter.
No attempt to check whether she was joking or unwell or dangerous. Just yes. And for a moment, Sarah did not know what to do with that. She had expected rejection again. She had been so certain she was about to experience the specific humiliation of being turned down twice in one night that she had already half prepared herself for it. Instead, she got yes. A yes from a stranger who watched her like he had been waiting. A yes that came without conditions, without caveats, without the long pause of a man calculating what he stood to gain. She should have been afraid. She had enough self-awareness to know that a rational person would have been very afraid. But the truth was, for the first time all night, for the first time in a long time, honestly, she felt something that was not dread. She felt, in some quiet and impossible way, chosen. He stepped forward out of the shadows, and she saw his face properly for the first time. And whatever she had expected, she had not expected that. There was something in his face that was ancient, not old in the way of age. He could not have been more than 10 years her senior, but ancient in the way of knowing, in the way of someone who had seen enough of the world that nothing surprised them anymore. Someone who had looked at darkness long enough that it no longer made them flinch. He extended his hand to her, and she took it. That was how it started. Not with bells, not with ceremony, not with anything that looked, from the outside, like the beginning of something significant. Just a hand extended in the rain, and a woman who was done waiting for her life to begin, finally deciding to move. His name was Cale. She learned that in the car. A long, dark vehicle that appeared as though it had been there all along, parked just off the road, waiting. She noticed that the driver did not ask where they were going. He simply drove. She noticed a great many things in those first hours. The way Cale held himself in the car beside her. Completely still, completely at ease, like a man who never wasted energy on anything that was not necessary. He did not fill silence with small talk. He did not ask her nervous questions or make jokes to lighten the atmosphere. He simply existed in the space, comfortable in it, and somehow against everything she would have predicted about herself that night. His stillness made her feel less frantic rather than more. She asked him eventually where they were going. He said, "My territory." 2 words. Quiet. Absolute. She wanted to ask more. She had 100 questions already stacking up behind her teeth. But something told her, some instinct she had learned to trust over years of reading people and situations in Ironvale, that she would get her answers. That patience here would be rewarded differently than it had been in her old life. So she watched the dark landscape move past the window and let the silence settle. They were married before dawn. It was nothing like she would have imagined a wedding, if she had ever allowed herself to imagine one. There was a witness, an elder who appeared to know exactly what was happening and seemed to find none of it unusual. There were words spoken, old words, older than Ironvale, older than any tradition she had grown up knowing. Words that carried weight the way ancient things do, not because someone told you they mattered, but because you could feel them settling into your bones as they were spoken. Cale spoke them steadily. She spoke them with hands that were only slightly shaking. And when it was done, when the bond had been sealed in whatever way bonds are sealed between strangers who choose each other in the dark, she felt something shift. Not inside her heart exactly, deeper than that, more physical, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves below the surface, like something that had been locked finally clicking open. She did not understand it yet, but she felt it. His home was nothing like Ironvale. Ironvale had been built for utility, pack halls, training grounds, functional structures designed around efficiency and hierarchy. Status was expressed through position, not through architecture. The place Kale brought her to was different in every way. It was older, enormously, quietly, heavily older. The kind of old that accumulates in stone walls and high ceilings and floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. It had not been built to impress, it had simply endured. And in enduring, it had become something imposing all on its own. The grounds were vast. The corridors were long. And the people, the staff, the guards, the attendants who moved through the halls with practiced quiet efficiency, they bowed to Kale without being prompted. Not the small acknowledgement nod she had seen in Ironvale. Not the deferential tilt of the head that juniors gave to seniors. A full bow, immediate, instinctive, and then they looked at her, not with the invisible woman look she had worn her entire life in Ironvale. Not with judgment or assessment or the subtle dismissal of someone calculating her bloodline and finding it lacking. They looked at her with something she had to look at twice before she recognized it because she had seen it directed at her so rarely. Respect, mixed with something else. Something that sat just at the edge of curiosity. Like they had been expecting her. Like they were seeing something arrive that they had been waiting on for a long time. She told herself she was reading too much into it. She was exhausted. She was raw. She was in an entirely unknown place with an entirely unknown man, and her nervous system had been through more than any one night should reasonably contain. She was probably projecting. But she noticed it. She noticed everything in those first days. She noticed that Kale gave her space without making her feel abandoned. He showed her the grounds, introduced her to the people who managed the household, ensured she had everything she needed, and then he stepped back. He did not hover. He did not interrogate her about what she was feeling or demand that she immediately become comfortable in a place that was entirely foreign to her. He gave her room, and in that room she began to breathe. She began to notice, too, the way other pack members, his people, not hers, she kept reminding herself, responded to her. The way they spoke to her with directness, not condescension. The way they answered her questions without making her feel foolish for asking them. The way, when she walked into a room, the energy shifted not with the low-grade tension she had always felt in Ironvale, the constant awareness of being assessed and found wanting, but with something quieter, something almost like relief. She did not understand it, but she noticed it, and she noticed, most of all, the way Kale watched her. She caught him doing it several times in those first days. Not staring, not ogling, nothing inappropriate. Just watching. With that same look he had given her in the rain. The look that she still could not entirely name. Like he was not learning her. Like he was remembering her. That was when the whispers started reaching her. Fragments of conversation that stopped just slightly too quickly when she entered rooms. The particular silence of people who have been talking about you and have not entirely decided how much they want you to know. She had grown up with that silence in Ironvale. She knew how to listen around it. And what she heard, in pieces, in halves, in the spaces between things that were said, was this: the king has been waiting for her. She tried to dismiss it. She was very good at talking herself out of things that did not have rational explanations. She had spent years being sensible, being measured, being the woman who made decisions from facts rather than feelings. The king has been waiting for her. That made no sense. They had not known each other. They had not moved in the same circles, had not even been aware of each other's existence before that night in the rain. The distinction mattered enormously, and she understood it the moment it was explained to her, understood it in the body as much as the mind. A Lycan king was not a rank that packs voted on or lineages passed down through inheritance. It was something older, something that manifested once in a generation, if that, in a wolf whose power exceeded the natural order of things. They were rarer than legend, more feared than anything Ironvale had ever taught her about. And the fear, she learned, was not because they were cruel. It was because they were ancient, because their power connected to something that regular wolves had long since evolved away from, something primal and enormous and utterly beyond the political structures that packs like Ironvale had built to make themselves feel safe and orderly. Alphas feared them because they could not be controlled, because they answered to nothing that men had built, because they existed in a separate category entirely from everyone else. And this man she had asked to marry her in the rain, this man who had said yes without hesitation, was one of them. She sat with that for a long time. She thought about the night they had met, about how he had been standing in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, about the certainty in his face when he looked at her, about the way he had agreed to marry a stranger without asking a single question, as though the answer had already been known and the question was just a formality. She thought about the whispers. The king has been waiting for her. And she thought about something else. Something small, something she had almost dismissed in the chaos of that first night. The way he said her name. The first time he used it, after they were married, after the elder had spoken and the bond had settled and she was standing in the dark stone corridor of his home feeling entirely lost. He had said her name.
Sera.
Not as though he was repeating something he had just learned. As though it was a word he had been holding for a very long time and was finally allowed to speak out loud. She had been too overwhelmed that night to register it fully. But it stayed with her. She needed answers. She found it on a Thursday. She had not been searching for it exactly, or rather, she had been searching without admitting to herself that she was searching. She had been exploring the older parts of the estate, the wings that were not in daily use, the rooms that smelled of time and old paper and the particular dust that accumulates around things that have not been touched in many years. She had always been drawn to old things. Old maps. Old records. Old histories. It was the historian in her, the part that had spent years in Ironvale reading battle strategies and pack lineages because no one had thought to stop her and because knowledge was the one thing that could not be revoked by bloodline. The chamber was at the end of a corridor that she had assumed was disused. The door was unlocked. Inside, shelves. Floor to ceiling. Old wood shelves lined with books and bound records and rolled documents sealed with wax that had dried and cracked decades ago. The kind of collection that speaks not of casual interest but of deliberate preservation. Someone had gathered these things on purpose. Someone had considered them important enough to keep. She moved through the shelves slowly, running her fingers along spines, reading titles in languages she partially recognized, pulling out a record here, unrolling a document there. And then she found the chest. Dark wood, very old. A lock that had already been opened. The latch was undone, the lid slightly raised, as though someone had been in here recently and had not quite closed it all the way on their way out. Or as though someone had left it for her to find. She opened it. Inside, beneath a layer of documents she did not immediately recognize, was a book. Not a printed book. Handwritten. The ink dark brown with age, the paper thick and heavy in that way that only very old paper is heavy, as though it has absorbed decades of atmosphere and holds them in every fiber. She sat down on the floor of the chamber because she felt, somehow, that this was going to take time, and she opened it. The language was old. Archaic in structure, words she had to work at, phrasing that wound through itself like roots rather than marching forward in logical lines. But she had spent years studying old texts in Ironvale. She was patient with difficult language. She read. For a long time she read. And then she came to the page. It was different from the surrounding text. Set apart, as though the author had understood they were recording something singular. The handwriting changed slightly here, became more careful, more deliberate. As though whoever had written it had taken a breath before beginning. Prophecy. Not vague. Not wrapped in the usual smoke of symbolic language that prophecies used to protect themselves from being too precisely understood. This one was direct. A woman born of mixed blood, rejected by the pack that should have claimed her, turned away by the name she sought to earn. She will walk out of her past life in a storm. She will come to the king in darkness. She will speak first. She will choose before she understands what she is choosing. And the king who has waited, who has carried the knowledge of her coming through years of discipline and patience and the particular loneliness of those who know too much of what is approaching, he will say yes, because he has always known her name, because she was written before either of them drew breath. The woman of mixed blood, rejected by lineage, will rise beyond lineage. She will become, beside the Lycan king, something that no line of pure blood has ever been able to produce. She will carry a power that was never about where she came from. It was always about where she was going. She is not the aftermath of rejection. She is the reason the rejection had to happen. She is the reason the storm was sent. She is the one the king has waited for. Her name was there, written in that archaic hand, written in ink that had dried long before her mother was born.
Sera.
She sat on the floor of that old chamber for a very long time, and all of it rearranged itself. Every piece that had not made sense assembled itself into a picture that made complete and devastating sense. The way he had been standing in exactly that place. The way he had said yes without questions. The way his people had looked at her with relief. The way he spoke her name like he had been practicing it in private for years. He had not married her out of coincidence. He had not said yes out of impulse. He had been waiting, his whole life. All that stillness, all that certainty, all that steadiness that she had felt radiating off him from the very first moment. It was the steadiness of a man who had known something enormous was coming and had simply prepared himself to receive it. She was what was coming. She had always been what was coming. And the man in Ironvale, the alpha who had stood in front of his entire pack and reduced 6 years of her life to 6 words, he had not ended her story. He had started it. She closed the book. She sat with the silence for a long time, and then she stood up. She found Cale in the Western Hall. He was alone, standing at the window that overlooked the training grounds, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture carrying that particular stillness she had come to recognize as something beyond mere calm. It was the stillness of someone who had trained themselves over a very long time to hold enormous things without letting them spill over. He heard her come in. She knew he did, his kind always did. But he did not turn around immediately. She crossed the hall. She stood beside him. She looked out the same window. And then she said, "How long have you known?" A pause. Short. The pause of someone who had known this conversation was coming and had been deciding for some time exactly how to have it. Then he said, "Since I was 19. She absorbed that. 19. He was 31 now. That was 12 years of knowing. 12 years of carrying a name that had been written centuries before either of them existed. 12 years of discipline and patience and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from knowing something you cannot tell anyone." She said, "You knew who I was before I spoke to you." "Yes." "You knew where I came from." "Yes." "You knew what had happened to me that night." A pause slightly longer than the others. Then, "I knew what was going to happen. I did not know the specifics. I did not know about Darien." Something changed in his voice on that name. Something very controlled that was not entirely controlled. "If I had known the specifics, I would have." He stopped himself. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and she saw, for the first time, the thing that had been underneath the stillness all along. He had not been calm because he was unaffected. He had been holding himself still because if he stopped, something enormous would move. She said more quietly, "You should have told me. I know. You let me walk into this believing it was a random night. Believing I had made an impulsive decision and you had made an impulsive decision and we were two strangers figuring it out together. That was not true." "No," he said. "It was not." "Why?" She needed him to say it. She needed to hear it from him directly, not from ink on paper in a forgotten chamber. Why didn't you tell me? He turned from the window then, and she saw his face in full, all the composure still there, because composure was what he was made of, but underneath it now visible in a way she had not been permitted to see before. He said, "Because I needed you to choose. Freely. Without knowing what I knew." The prophecy is specific on this point, not as a rule I was following, but as something I understood when I read it the first time and every time since. If I had told you who I was, what I knew, what was written, you would have made your choice inside that knowledge. And it would never have been truly yours. She was quiet. He continued, "I have spent 12 years asking myself whether that was the right thing. Whether giving you the freedom of not knowing was more important than the honesty you deserved. I do not have a clean answer. I know it was the harder way. I know it cost you something. And I know that is not a cost I had the right to decide for you." She thought about the chamber, about the careful way the chest had been left unlocked, about the lid raised just slightly. She said, "I am angry." "I know," he said. "You have every right to be. I am angry at Darien. I am angry at Ironvale. I am angry at 12 years of you knowing my name while I had no idea you existed." A pause. "I am angry that it all had to happen the way it happened." "Yes. And," she said, and this part surprised her as she said it, surprised her with how true it felt. "I am not sorry I walked out of those gates. I am not sorry I said what I said to you in the rain. Whatever the prophecy says, whatever was written, I made that choice. And I am not sorry I made it." He looked at her. That look again. The one she now understood. Not learning her. Recognizing her. "Neither am I," he said. She did not become something overnight. That is the part of these stories that always gets told wrong. The idea that revelation equals transformation, that the moment you understand your destiny, you step into it fully formed and suddenly capable of everything you were not before. That was not how it happened for Sarah. What happened was slower, and harder, and in many ways more meaningful because of it. She started training with Kale's warriors the week after the conversation in the Western Hall. Not because anyone asked her to, not because the prophecy said she should, but because she was Sarah, and Sarah, when she did not know what to do with something enormous, had always moved her body through the enormousness until the path through it became clear. The warriors of Kale's territory were unlike anything she had trained with in Ironvale. Faster, more disciplined in ways that were harder to name, not more rigid but more precise. Like the difference between rules and understanding. They did not follow technique because they had been told to. They had internalized it so deeply that technique had become instinct. She was behind them, by a significant margin at first. She had expected this, and she did not let it stop her. What she had not expected was the way they responded to her. They did not treat her as the alpha's consort who had decided to play at being a warrior. They did not give her the careful, slightly patronizing deference she had sometimes seen given to high-status women in Ironvale who wanted to be included in training without being genuinely challenged. They trained her the way they trained each other, which meant she left every session bruised, exhausted, and more technically educated than she had been when she walked in. She loved it. And something else happened in those first weeks of training that she had not anticipated and could not entirely explain. Her wolf was changing. Not dramatically. Not in visible, stageable ways that she could point to and describe. But in the way that matters more, the way that happens below the surface, in the place where the wolf and the human self exist in conversation with each other. Her senses had always been sharp, sharper than most mixed-blood wolves, which had always been a source of complicated feeling for her, because it was a gift that did not match the status she had been assigned. But now they were becoming something else entirely. Deeper. More layered. Like a frequency she had always been able to hear was suddenly becoming audible in ranges she had not known it occupied. She could sense pack bonds in a way she had never been able to before. Not just feel her own bond to Kale, that had been there since the night they were married, warm and steady and humming just below awareness like the lowest note of a chord, but sense the bonds between others. The way loyalty moved between people. The way trust felt different from obligation. The way a pack in genuine harmony resonated differently from a pack that was holding itself together through fear or hierarchy. She told Cale about it one evening. He listened with the full attention he always gave, the complete, unhurried quality that had taken her weeks to stop feeling uncomfortable under. She had grown up around people who half listened, who were already forming their response while you were still talking, who treated conversation as an exchange of position statements rather than an actual sharing of something. Cale listened the way you listen when what someone is saying genuinely matters to you. He said, "That is the bond sense. It is old. I have not heard of it in a mixed-blood wolf in 3 generations." She said, "Is that what the prophecy meant? About becoming something no lineage can contain?" He considered. "Partly. I think the prophecy was speaking to something that will take longer to fully arrive. But this, yes. I think this is the beginning of it. The beginning." She sat with that word for a while. She had spent so long believing she was already in the middle of something, the middle of her relationship with Darien, the middle of her place in Ironvale, the middle of figuring out who she was in a world that had decided she was worth less than she knew herself to be. The beginning was a different thing entirely. The beginning meant that everything before it had been preparation. The beginning meant that she was not behind. She had never been behind. She had been in the preceding chapters, accumulating exactly what she needed to arrive at this point with the right tools. The loneliness of Ironvale had taught her how to be self-sufficient. The invisibility had taught her how to watch. The training had taught her how to fight. The years of studying strategy no one credited her for had taught her how to think several moves ahead of a situation. And the rejection, the public, deliberate 6-word rejection in front of the entire pack that she had believed at the time was the worst moment of her life. The rejection had sent her through the gates, into the storm, into a man who had been waiting. She had needed all of it. She had needed every piece of it to be exactly as hard as it was. And standing in the training grounds of a place that was becoming, quietly and undeniably, her home. Feeling her body grow stronger, feeling her wolf grow deeper, feeling the bond to Cale pulse warm and constant in her chest like a second heartbeat. She understood something she had not been able to understand while she was still inside her old life. You cannot see the shape of a story while you are still in the middle of it. You can only feel the weight of individual moments. The weight of getting up before dawn when you would rather stay down. The weight of staying when everything says leave, and leaving when everything in you wants to stay. The weight of choosing, even when the right choice costs you everything you thought you wanted. And then, if you have made those choices long enough, if you have carried that weight faithfully and without knowing the destination, you arrive somewhere. And you look back, and the shape of it becomes clear. Every seemingly wrong turn was the right turn. Every closed door was guiding you toward the open one. Every person who looked at you and did not see you, they were all, every single one of them, part of the path to the people who would look at you and finally recognize exactly who you are. 3 months after the night in the rain, Darien Voss made a formal request. She heard about it through Cale first. He told her directly, with the same careful honesty that had become the foundation of everything between them. Darien had sent a delegation to the territory. Formal, diplomatic in tone. The language of packs that want something and are wise enough to be indirect about wanting it. What he wanted, it emerged, was an alliance. Ironvale had been experiencing difficulties. The political fallout from certain decisions, she did not need the details spelled out to understand what decisions, had cost them relationships they had previously relied on. And Cale's territory, it turned out, was a considerably more powerful neighbor than Ironvale had perhaps fully calculated when it was treating its discarded people as though they had nowhere better to go. She sat with that for a time. The version of herself who had stood in that hall 3 months ago, who had absorbed 6 words in public and walked away and not cried in front of any of them, that woman had not known yet what she was walking toward. Had not known about prophecies or bond sense or the way her wolf was changing. Had not known that the stranger in the rain was a king, or that the king had known her name for 12 years. She had only known that she was done. She thought about what it would feel like to say no. She thought about what it would feel like to let Darian's delegation sit and wait and eventually receive a polite refusal. She thought about the 6 words. She thought about the woman who had stood behind him that day, poised and pure blood and everything Iron Veil valued. She thought about all of it. And then she thought about something else. She thought about what she actually wanted. Not what would make a satisfying story. Not what the rejected woman in her was entitled to. Not what revenge would feel like or whether it would feel like anything at all. What did she want? She realized, exactly what she already had. She wanted the training grounds and the bond sense and the evenings in the old library reading texts that Kale pulled from shelves and left open on tables for her without comment, knowing she would find them. She wanted the steady warmth of the bond in her chest. She wanted the way her wolf felt in this place. Deep and expanding and finally given permission to become what it had always been trying to become. She had no need to go back. She had no need for Darian's apology. No need to accept his alliance or refuse it dramatically. No need to construct any kind of statement about what his rejection had cost him. The answer spoke for itself. She was already living it. She and Kale discussed the delegation together. That was another thing she was still adjusting to, the way decisions in this territory were made. Not handed down from alpha to pack. Not declared and expected to be followed. But discussed. Considered. Wait. He asked her what she wanted to do. She told him. He listened. He agreed. He sent a response that was courteous and entirely final. And that was the end of it. Not dramatic. Not triumphant in the loud way that stories often make triumph look. Just done. The chapter closed. And the one she was actually in continued. There are things I want you to take from Sarah's story. Not the prophecy that is specific to her. Not the Lycan king or the gates of Iron Veil or the storm that broke exactly when she needed something to break. The things underneath all of that. The world will decide what you are worth based on criteria that have nothing to do with your actual worth. This has always been true. The criteria change: bloodline, background, credentials, connections, the way you look or speak or where you come from. But the mechanism is always the same. Systems built by people with power define value in whatever way keeps their power intact. And those systems are wrong. Not always. Not about everything. But about the fundamental question, about who deserves to be seen, who deserves to be chosen, who deserves to be given room to become what they are actually capable of becoming. They are wrong more often than they are right. And the people who are most frequently told they are not enough by those systems, they are very often exactly the people the systems are most afraid of. Because what is not enough for a system that values conformity is usually exactly what is needed to build something the system cannot contain. Sarah was not enough for Iron Veil's bloodline. That was true. She did not fit what they had decided to value. She did not measure up to the criteria they had built their entire social order around. And she was, in precisely the same moment, more than any of them had fully understood how to account for. Both things were true simultaneously. That is the thing they do not tell you about being underestimated. That the same people who reject you for not fitting their measure are often the ones who will eventually come knocking when they realize the measure was flawed to begin with. Darian came knocking. Not because Sarah had done anything to make him regret what he had done. She had simply lived. She had walked through the gates and built something extraordinary and become herself more completely than she had ever been permitted to in a place that kept trying to decide what she was allowed to be. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Not every person who walks away from you is a loss. Some of them are releases. Some of the things we fight hardest to hold on to are the exact things we most need to be freed from, and the freedom only becomes visible after the holding on ends. The storm that breaks the life you thought you were building might be the very thing clearing the path to the life that was always meant for you. Sarah walked out of those gates in a storm, and on the other side of that storm was everything. So tell me, where are you right now in your own story? Are you still inside the gates, holding on? Or have you already walked through them? Because if you are on the other side of something that felt like ending, if you are standing in the rain wondering what comes next, You are exactly where you need to be. And if this story reached something in you tonight, there is another one waiting. Because not every queen rises from love. Some rise from the ashes of everything they were told they could not survive. Subscribe. I will see you in the next one.